He said it without checking his watch, without pausing in whatever he was doing behind the half-open conference room door. The way men say things they don't think will land anywhere. She's not going anywhere, Ward. Women like Isabel don't leave. They adjust. Isabel stood in the hallway of the 34th floor with a thermos of chicken soup in both hands and felt something happen inside her chest that she hadn't expected. Not rage. Not the sharp particular grief of a woman who has just heard something true. Something quieter than either of those. Relief. Because after 2 years of asking herself whether she was imagining things, whether the distance was temporary, whether the version of Stefan she'd married was just buried under a difficult quarter, whether she owed the marriage more patience, she finally had the answer. Not from a fight, not from a conversation that had been carefully avoided, from a Tuesday afternoon in a hallway outside a room where she wasn't supposed to be. The word he'd used was adjust. And the terrible thing was that he wasn't wrong. She had been adjusting. Quietly, practically, the way she'd learned to do things that mattered to her. What he apparently didn't know, hadn't stopped to wonder, was that she had reached the edge of what she was willing to adjust toward. She turned around and walked back to the elevator without making a sound. The Friday soup had started 18 months ago, almost by accident. Not a ritual she'd planned. She'd been delivering a catering order to a building 3 blocks from Cade Capital when Stefan had called, not to talk, just to say he hadn't eaten since 7 that morning and probably wouldn't get to dinner until 9. Not a complaint, just information, the way he relayed most things, like inventory, like weather. She'd stopped at the deli on Wabash, bought broth, added the herbs she kept in her cafe bag, warmed it in a borrowed pot in the back, while the owner watched her with the expression of a man who had seen stranger things, and she'd shown up at Cade Capital with a thermos and a plastic spoon. Stefan had come down to the lobby himself that first time. She hadn't expected that. He was not a man who came downstairs. The world arranged itself around Stefan Cade's schedule. But he'd come down in his shirt sleeves, tie loosened, and looked at the thermos, and then at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. You stopped what you were doing for this? You hadn't eaten. He'd looked at her for a moment in that way he had, the way that had made her feel, once, like the most clearly seen person in any room. Then he took the thermos. After that, it was Fridays. Every Friday for 18 months, through 2 acquisitions and 1 market correction that turned Stefan's office into a war room for 6 weeks straight, through Mira's ear infection and Isabel's back-to-back 60-hour weeks in November when the gravel road had done its best December revenue and she'd barely slept. She'd still shown up on Fridays. Stefan's assistant, a precise young man named Hector who communicated primarily in efficient nods, had started recognizing her in the lobby. By the 4th month, he just waved her up. But something had shifted in the past year. It wasn't one moment. Marriages didn't break on one moment. They broke on accumulation, on the small math of things subtracted, so gradually you didn't notice the balance until the account was empty. It was the way Friday visits had contracted. 40 minutes became 20. 20 became 10. Twice she'd waited in the lobby while Hector came down to say, very carefully, that Stefan was tied up, that he'd try to make time next week. She'd smiled and said, of course, and driven back to the cafe and put the soup in the walk-in cooler and eaten it herself over the following 2 days. She hadn't mentioned it. That was the part that probably should have scared her, the not mentioning, because Isabel Crane was not someone who went quiet. She had opinions. She stated them. She had, on more than one occasion, told Stefan directly that he was wrong about something, and he had listened to her, which was one of the reasons she'd agreed to marry him, the particular quality of his attention. The way he listened, like what she said, actually changed the shape of the room for him. But somewhere in the past year she had stopped bringing things up, not out of fear, out of the creeping, specific suspicion that saying the words out loud would only confirm what she was beginning to know anyway, that she had become optional, not maliciously, not deliberately, just incrementally, the way things become optional when someone stops choosing them every day and starts assuming they'll simply be there. She hadn't told anyone she was thinking about leaving. Not her sister in Milwaukee, not her best friend Deb, not the therapist she'd stopped seeing in March, when the Tuesday sessions started feeling less like clarifying and more like practicing grief for a situation she wasn't ready to name. But she had signed a lease on an apartment in Pilsen 4 weeks ago. Not in a moment of anger. There had been no moment of anger. She'd toured it on a Thursday afternoon, a 2-bedroom on the second floor of a yellow brick building 3 blocks from her cafe. Good light. Small kitchen with a window above the sink that looked out over a courtyard where someone had planted a vegetable garden that had no business surviving a Chicago October. She'd stood at that window for a while and thought, this is manageable. Then she'd signed. She hadn't moved things dramatically. Small loads, her grandmother's blue mixing bowls, Mira's drawings from the refrigerator rolled carefully into a canvas bag. The bread knife she'd bought herself when she opened the cafe, the good one, German steel, worn handle, not pretty, just reliable. She hadn't taken anything Stefan would notice immediately, which was, she understood, its own form of information. The Tuesday she heard what she heard, she left the thermos at the front desk. Hector had looked up when she set it down. He was 26 and had the careful eyes of someone who had learned early to notice everything and say very little. She's always taken care of you, Isabel said. She meant it without drama and without resentment. Please make sure he actually drinks it, the whole thing. Hector nodded once. Something in his face shifted just slightly. He said, Mrs. Cade. It's fine, she said, and she meant that too. She pushed through the revolving door onto the street. The November cold hit her, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed. Then she walked to her car, sat behind the wheel without starting it, and watched the Michigan Avenue traffic move past. Taxis, delivery trucks, people with somewhere to be who had no idea what was happening in a parked Volvo 3 feet away. She started the car and drove to Pilsen. Stefan came downstairs to the lobby at 6:47 that evening to find Hector at the desk with the thermos. In an expression the young man was working hard to keep professional. My wife leave this? About 2 hours ago. She say anything. Hector looked at the thermos. She said to make sure you drink the whole thing. Stefan looked at the thermos. He picked it up. He thought, she'll be home. He walked out. He was not a man who examined his assumptions. That was, in its own quiet way, the beginning of everything that followed. The house in Lincoln Park was still when he got home that evening. He didn't notice. He set his keys on the kitchen island, loosened his tie, opened the refrigerator, and stood in front of it for 30 seconds, seeing nothing he wanted. He closed it. He went upstairs. The bedroom was dark. He assumed Isabel was asleep and was quiet getting undressed. He did not reach across to her side of the bed. He woke at 5:50 to his phone, a time zone issue with a Singapore deal, and lay there for 4 minutes reading the thread. When he sat up, her side of the bed was already made. He assumed she'd gotten an early start. He showered. He went downstairs. Coffee wasn't made. He made it himself, which he was entirely capable of doing, and stood at the kitchen window with his mug and worked through the overnight messages. Mira came downstairs at 7:15. She was 7 years old and still had the morning face of a child who takes sleeping seriously. She looked at the kitchen. She looked at Stefan. Where's Mom? Probably got an early start at the cafe, he said. Mira looked at the counter, at the empty space where Isabel's travel mug usually sat, charging on its little platform. She said nothing. She got herself a bowl of cereal. He left at 7:40. He didn't notice her car was gone from its spot in the garage. By the 5th day, the house had started to change, not loudly. Nothing had moved in any obvious way. It was more the quality of the air. The flowers Isabel kept in the front hall, cream and pale yellow, replaced every 5 days without announcement, had started losing their edge. By Thursday, they were clearly dying, stems going slack in water that hadn't been changed. Dolores, who had worked for Stefan for 7 years and had developed the particular emotional neutrality of someone who had witnessed enough to know that silence was its own form of survival, changed the flowers without comment. She said nothing about the other side of the closet she'd noticed while making the bed, the hangers that were there but not full, the blue mixing bowls missing from the lower cabinet. She lasted until Friday morning. She found Stefan in the kitchen before 6, not working, just standing at the window with cold coffee in one hand and the specific expression of a man who has started to notice something he doesn't know how to name. She planned this, Dolores said. He turned around. She kept her hands folded in front of her. She was 58 years old and had decided, somewhere between the dying flowers and the careful absence of small things, that she was too old to pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen. Mrs. Cade, she didn't leave because she was upset. She left because she finished deciding. Stefan was very still. What did you say? The mixing bowls, Dolores said. The blue ones her grandmother gave her. Those went first, about a month ago, and Mira's drawings from the refrigerator. She took those 2 weeks back, rolled them up carefully like it was nothing. She paused. And the bread knife. The good one she bought when she opened the cafe. That was last week. You watched her. I watched her take what was hers, Dolores said, with the precision of a woman who understood exactly which detail was load-bearing. That was all I saw. He stood in the kitchen alone for a long time after she left, the bread knife. He knew the one, ugly handle, worn wood, a knife that had no business being as sharp as it was after 8 years. Isabel had told him once it was the first thing she'd bought herself after she opened the cafe. Not the espresso machine, not the display case. The knife, because she intended to bake her own bread and wasn't going to do it with anything that didn't mean it. He'd found it funny at the time. He understood now, standing in a kitchen without it, that he hadn't been paying attention to what the story meant. Ward came in that afternoon without being called, which in 9 years had never once happened. He stood in the doorway of Stefan's office and said, I need you to hear something. Stefan looked up. You're going to tell me where she is. The apartment in Pilsen, 2nd floor, yellow building on West 18th. She signed 4 weeks ago. He didn't look away. It's in her name, her account. She didn't try to hide it. The air in the room settled into something denser. How long have you known? Since the second day. When she didn't go to her sister's or anywhere expected, I had someone run a basic search. Ward paused. She's been volunteering at the Pilsen Community Kitchen on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, already in twice a week. And you didn't tell me. No. Why? Ward was quiet for a long moment. Not the quiet of evasion. Ward didn't evade things. It was the quiet of a man choosing between the easy thing and the right thing, and understanding the right one would be uncomfortable for everyone in the room. Because, he said finally, I was there when you said what you said on Tuesday, to me, in the conference room. I was the one you were talking to when you said she wasn't going anywhere, that women like her just adjust. The room went very still. And I thought, Ward said, that maybe you needed a few days to sit in the quiet before I handed you information you'd use to go collect her like a misplaced file. Something moved across Stefan's face, fast and gone. She's not in danger, Ward continued. I've checked. She's safe. A pause. She looks good, Stefan. I had someone watch the kitchen from across the street yesterday. She was teaching a woman how to make tamales and laughing at something the woman said. She was just, he stopped, laughing. Something moved through Stefan's expression that had no performance in it. I don't have a position here, Ward said. I'm just telling you I was in that room when you said it. Get out, Stefan said, quiet, no heat. Ward got out. The Pilsen Community Kitchen had been running for 11 years out of a converted storefront on West 19th. Cooking classes for low-income families, nutrition workshops for seniors, a Saturday meal service that fed about 90 people a week. Its director was a woman named Claudine, who wore her hair in a gray-streaked bun and had the particular no-nonsense warmth of someone who had spent a decade watching people discover that food was not just survival but dignity. When Stefan called to inquire about a possible donation, he gave only his first name. Claudine had not asked for more. She'd said, "We're short about 40,000 on refrigeration replacement and winter supplies. If you're serious, I'll send you the breakdown." She sent it that evening. He spent 2 hours with the spreadsheet and a legal pad, doing arithmetic. The donation went through a charitable foundation he maintained, clean, documented, nothing pointing back to Cade Capital or to him. He did not tell anyone he'd done it. Not because he expected credit, because credit was the wrong currency here, and he was slowly, painfully, learning to understand what the right currency actually was. Isabel found out from Claudine 3 days after it cleared. Claudine was not a woman who speculated. She simply looked at Isabel over her reading glasses and said, "Someone did careful arithmetic on our 990s. The number was exact, not approximate, exact. I thought you should know." Isabel looked at the amount on the printout. She thought about a man who built his entire career on finding gaps in financial structures and filling them efficiently. She thought about the legal pad he kept on the left side of his desk, covered in his handwriting, numbers, margins, the shorthand of a mind that could not stop working. She put the printout face down and said, "I'll cover the serving shift on Thursday." She told herself it changed nothing. She wasn't entirely sure that was true. Stefan started showing up at the kitchen on Thursdays, not to see her. He told himself this clearly, in the specific internal language he used before decisions he needed to be honest about. He called ahead, gave his first name, said he wanted to volunteer. Claudine had opened the door, looked at him for about 4 seconds with the expression of someone who had spent years reading people for what they could actually offer versus what they thought they were offering, and said, "We have 40 pounds of sweet potatoes that need peeling. You can start there." He peeled sweet potatoes for 2 hours. He moved tables. He reorganized the dry storage room with the instinctive precision of someone who couldn't help finding the inefficiency in any system. And when Claudine looked at it, she said, with characteristic understatement, "That'll work." Isabel came through the back door at 9:45 on the third Thursday. She stopped when she saw him. The stop was complete, not a flinch, not a step back. Full, total stillness. The kind that happens when the body receives information the mind is still processing. She was holding a canvas bag and a box of donated canned goods, and she looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. Not anger, something more layered than anger. The specific look of a person who has done the careful work of building a new life and has found an old piece of the previous one standing quietly in the middle of it. Stefan. Isabel. They looked at each other across the length of the storage room. Claudine, who had materialized in the doorway, looked at them both and said, with the timing of a woman who knew when to give a room its space, "I need someone on the morning prep," and disappeared. "Claudine knows who you are?" Isabel asked. "She knows my first name." "That's not what I asked." He picked up the box of cans she'd set down on the nearest shelf and started sorting them by category. "I don't think Claudine needs more than she has." Isabel watched him, the donation, the exact number. He didn't deny it. "You did the math on their financials." "There was a gap," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted, not warmth exactly, but an opening, like a room where a window has been cracked. "If this is a strategy," she said quietly, "if this is the version of showing up that is still, at its core, about controlling the outcome." "I know," he said. "Do you?" He met her eyes. "I don't know if I know. That's the honest answer. I'm trying to find out." She stood with that for a moment. Then she picked up her canvas bag and went to help with the morning prep. He came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. He was not trying to manufacture proximity. He carried boxes. He learned where things went without being asked twice. He showed up at 7, stayed until noon, took the L home. Isabel worked Tuesdays and Thursdays both. They shared the space the way two people share space in a working kitchen, with function, with the practical language of "can you pass that?" and "these go on the lower shelf." And if their paths occasionally crossed in a way that couldn't be attributed entirely to the room's layout, neither of them addressed it. It was more than he deserved. He knew that, so he took it. 6 weeks after his first Thursday at the kitchen, his phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Ward. "The Hensley account," Ward said, and something in his voice put Stefan fully awake. "It's not a billing discrepancy. It was a test. Rourke has been building a position in the licensing board for the waterfront parcel. 4 months, maybe 5, while we've been watching the discrepancy." Stefan set down his coffee. "How exposed are we?" "Less than you'd think, but there's a window, and it's narrow. Get me Brennan on the phone, in person, not by message. I need him at the office by 10. By 3 that afternoon, the position Rourke had been building quietly for 5 months had been interrupted through 3 separate channels, none of which could be traced cleanly back to Cade Capital. The licensing board member, who was about to commit, found 2 pieces of information waiting for him: that the approach he'd received was now documented somewhere Rourke couldn't reach, and that there was a considerably better arrangement available if he simply continued doing his job correctly. Ward called at 4:40. It's handled. And Rourke. He'll know by tomorrow it fell apart. He won't know where the interference came from. "Let him sit with that," Stefan said. He hung up. He sat in the chair at the head of the conference table and looked at the room. The deal boards, the whiteboards, the functional ugliness of a space built entirely for outcomes, and thought about a woman who spent her Thursday mornings teaching people to cook and laughed at something a stranger said and didn't look like she was performing anything. He thought about a word: adjust. He picked up his phone and pulled up the community kitchen's website. He read the page about their December community dinner, a neighborhood event, first Saturday of the month, open to anyone, book donation drive included. Families, kids, whoever needed a warm room and a good meal. It was the end of October. He had 5 weeks. The separation papers arrived on a Monday. Clean language, fair numbers, nothing punitive, nothing designed to unravel things that had nothing to do with a marriage. She was asking for the Pilsen apartment, her half of the joint savings, and the bread maker they'd bought on their 2nd anniversary because she'd wanted to learn to do it properly and had never gotten around to it. There was a handwritten note tucked inside the back page. He read it once, then he put it face down on the desk and did not read it again for 5 days. It said, "I'm not angry. I want you to know that first, because I know you'll read everything else through that lens if I don't say it first. I'm not angry, and I'm not punishing you. I spent the last year trying to figure out how to say that I needed more of you, and then slowly realizing there wasn't more of you available. Not for this. Maybe there never was. That's not a condemnation. It's just the truth as I understand it. Thank you for what we had when we were actually building it. Take care of yourself. I mean that." He held the papers on his desk for 23 days without signing. He told his attorney, "Don't file anything, no response, no counter, just hold." The December dinner fell on a Saturday, the first week of the month. Isabel had organized it. Stefan had coordinated the supply logistics, unglamorous work, 17 spreadsheets, 3 follow-up calls to a corporate donor who had pledged cases of olive oil and needed a gentle reminder twice, and arrived at the kitchen at 6 in the morning to help set up. He knew the room by now. He knew where the folding tables went, and which chair had the bad left leg, and where Claudine kept the extension cords. He set up the space, tested the sound system for the musicians coming at noon, stacked the book donation boxes in the back by age range and reading level. Claudine arrived at 8. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room. She said, without preamble, the extension cord. Behind the radiator, there was a spare 3-footer in the cabinet. She made a sound that was not quite approval, but was in its vicinity. Get started on the warming trays. The families started arriving at 10. Isabel came at 10:15 with Mira, who was wearing a coat with a small wolf embroidered on the pocket and had very decided opinions about the book table. Mira stopped when she saw Stefan. She looked at him with the uncomplicated directness of a 7-year-old deciding whether she was going to be delighted or suspicious. "You're here," she said. "I am," he said. She assessed him for another moment. Then she said, "Do you know where the picture books are?" And when he told her, third section, left side, red labels, she went there with purpose, satisfied. He watched her go. He turned around. Isabel was standing 10 feet away in her gray coat, slightly too large, the kind of coat a person buys for warmth and not for anything else, holding a clipboard and looking at him with an expression he'd come to recognize over these past weeks. Not closed, not warm. Something that was honestly, carefully, somewhere in between. She walked over. "Mira asked about you," she said. "Last Tuesday. She wanted to know if you were okay." He didn't say anything. 7-year-olds notice more than we think they do, Isabel said. She said you seemed different. She said you seemed like you were paying attention. "I'm trying to." She looked at the organized book tables, the spreadsheet on the clipboard, cross-referenced against the donations that had come in. You followed up on the olive oil donor. They'd pledged. There was a gap. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. Something almost happened in her expression. She folded the clipboard against her chest and looked at him directly. "The thing you said to Ward in the conference room. I know. Women like me don't leave, we adjust. I know. You believed it when you said it. That's the part I keep coming back to. You weren't performing something. You were accurate about who you'd let me become in your life." He held her gaze. He didn't try to argue the edges off it. "Yes," he said, "all of it. You were right to believe it. The version of me that said that had made you infrastructure, not deliberately. But the effect was the same, and I know the difference between intent and impact." She was quiet. Out on the floor, the room had the warm noise of families and children, and someone's grandmother genuinely delighted by the book table. Through the window, the December light was the pale particular gray of a Chicago afternoon that didn't apologize for itself. "The man who said that," Isabel said quietly, "and the man who did arithmetic on a nonprofit's 990 forms and showed up at 6 in the morning to set up folding tables and learned where Claudine keeps the extension cords." She paused. "Are those the same man?" "Yes," he said. "That's the part I had to stop running from. I wanted them to be different. Wanted the one who said what he said to be some separate version, some bad quarter I could point to and set aside. But it was me." He looked at her steadily. "The same man who built a business by reading every room except the one that mattered is standing here talking to you. And the same man is trying to make different choices. That's all I can honestly say." She listened all the way through. She always had. He'd failed to recognize that as the specific gift it was. The event ran until 3. By 2:30, the families had mostly gone, and the room had the warm, particular aftermath of something that had worked. Empty trays, books in new hands, Mira asleep in a corner chair, with a picture book open across her lap like she'd simply stopped mid-page and let sleep take her. Isabel found Stefan in the back room stacking the last of the supply boxes. She came in and sat on the edge of the long prep table, not performing anything, just sitting the way people sit when they're tired in an honest way. He turned around. "The papers," she said. "My attorney says you haven't responded." "No. That's unusual for you." "It is," he agreed. "I've been sitting with them." She looked at her hands. "I haven't filed," she said. "I've had them for almost 6 weeks. My attorney keeps asking. I keep saying I need more time." She looked up. "I told myself I was waiting to feel certain, but I think I was actually watching whether it would hold when nothing was holding it in place. No promise, no conversation where everything gets resolved, no grand moment." "Mira's coat," he said. She looked at him. "I bought it 3 weeks ago. I knew she'd like it and I left it at the apartment. I wasn't trying to." He stopped. There was no strategy in it. I just knew she'd like wolves. Something moved through Isabel's expression that hadn't been there before. "She loves it," she said quietly. The sounds from out front settled, chairs folding, Claudine's voice organizing the last of the cleanup, Mira beginning to stir in her corner. "I'm not going to tell you I've changed," he said. "I'm going to tell you that I understand." For the first time with any real clarity, what I failed to do, and why it cost you what it cost. And I'm going to tell you that the Thursday mornings aren't going away whatever you decide. Because this is the first thing I've done in 15 years that doesn't have a number attached to it. And I didn't know I needed that until I found it. She listened. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she reached into the inside pocket of her gray coat and took out an envelope. He recognized the dimensions. He'd looked at its counterpart on his desk for 23 days. She held it out. He took it. "It's still unsigned," she said. "I want you to take it back." He held the envelope. He looked at her. "I'm not saying we go back to what we were," she said, and her voice was steady in the way of someone who had walked a long way to get here and knew exactly where she stood. "We can't. That's not available anymore. But I've been watching 4 months of something that wasn't built for my benefit. Watching you when you thought you weren't being seen." She held his eyes. "I think there's something worth finding out on the other side of this, if you want to find out." He thought about the first Friday, the thermos, the lobby, the way he'd come downstairs in his shirt sleeves and looked at her like she'd said something surprising just by showing up. He thought about 18 months of soup that got shorter and shorter until it was a thermos left at a front desk with a note that said, "Make sure he drinks the whole thing." He thought about a woman who had signed a lease before she said a single word, not in anger, but in the quiet, practical way she did everything that mattered to her. He thought about a word, adjust. He put the envelope in his inside jacket pocket. "One thing," he said, "if I become background again, if you're accommodating me instead of choosing me, I need you to say it directly, not for my comfort, because I would rather know than go on assuming." She looked at him. "That's what I needed 2 years ago." "I know. I'm asking for it now." She thought about this for a moment. "And if your phone comes to the table on Sunday mornings?" She said, "I'm going to put it in the other room." He almost said something. He stopped himself. "All right," he said instead. Mira appeared in the doorway, wolf coat on, picture book tucked under her arm, looking at both of them with the frank assessment of a child who understands more than she lets on. "Are we going home?" she asked. Isabel looked at her daughter, then she looked at Stefan. "We're going home," she said. They carried the last of the things to the car together while Claudine locked up the kitchen, exchanging a look with Isabel over the key that meant approximately what a long look between women who have learned to read rooms always means. Mira walked between them on the sidewalk, holding the picture book in both hands, stepping deliberately over every crack in the concrete with the commitment of a child for whom this game still mattered. It was cold in the particular way of early December in Chicago. Not brutal, just clarifying, the kind of cold that made the world feel specific and real. Isabel's breath made small clouds. The streetlights were coming on block by block down the avenue. Stefan didn't reach for her hand. He was thinking about it. The muscle memory of it was there, the old habit, and he stopped himself because the old habit belonged to the man who'd treated her presence like something that would simply persist. He was trying to build different habits, and sometimes that meant holding the impulse until it was earned. They walked another half block. Then Isabel's hand found his. Not announced, not accompanied by any shift in pace or any look, just her hand in his, the familiar, unchanged weight of it, and she kept walking, and he held on, and Mira hopped over a crack and said something about the plot of the book, and they both listened. The city went on around them. It always went on. Indifferent and enormous, and entirely unbothered by two people on a sidewalk in December, working out the careful, costly math of choosing each other again. He had spent 20 years believing that certainty was the most valuable thing a man could own. He understood now, in the cold with her hand in his, and their daughter narrating the plot of a book about a family of foxes who kept getting lost and kept finding their way back, that certainty was not the same as being right, and that the most important rooms in his life had not been the ones where he'd read every signal and controlled every outcome. They had been the ones where he'd finally, at considerable cost, stopped assuming he already knew what was there.